Another way of making sure that the player is going across in the correct direction is by making a single trip detector across the finish line. So if I go in here, so if I turn on this, it will give us like a demo. So as it goes back over the line, it will subtract 1 from how many laps has been covered, and then when it goes over the right way, it will add 1 to the laps that's been covered. So I demonstrate that just using that, like that. So normally they'll be going forwards and stuff, but then if they reverse over it, then they'll have to, if they like go back around the track a load of times, they'll have to keep on going forwards to actually complete the race. You see the idea? So let's start by adding a trigger zone for when we're going forwards. So we want the trigger zone to line up with the finish line and go that way. So let's add a trigger zone like that. And I'll make it a box shape. Go across like that. Oh, we need to set the trigger zone to be detecting that tag again. Just use up and down on the D-pad, and now it's finding that tag. So if it starts off in the trigger zone and goes out of it because it's going backwards, then we want to know that and do some stuff. So let's put that through a signal manipulator. So we can see on the face of the gadget what it's actually getting as the input and output. So if we just plug this in as a test. So if you play time and turn it on, it just normally it's receiving 1 from the switch because it's on, and then it's sending out 1. But then if we go on pulse on input on and play time, then when the input goes from 0 to 1, or an off signal to an on signal like that, it will send a pulse, which is an on signal for a really short time, and you can use that to trigger different pieces of logic. We can also find a similar setting in the custom remapper mode, and down here is edge mode, and there's pulse at on, so that behaves the same way. There's also pulse at off, which means when it's on and then the signal goes off, then it sends a pulse, instead of when it starts, it sends a pulse when it ends. So we want to know if the tag is leaving that trigger zone, then we want to do some stuff. So while it's in the trigger zone is sending a 1 or an on signal, and then when we leave the trigger zone, it's sending an off. So we want to know when it goes from on to off, which is what the pulse at off does. So if we wire that detected into the signal, and then play time, and then it's in the zone, and then we go out of the zone, and then it sends a signal. But if we go from out of the zone to in the zone, nothing happens. So only when we go out. So that'll handle when we want to subtract a lap, but we also want to be able to add a lap when we go into the zone. So let's go like that, and just use the pulse at on. So now while we're inside and go out, then the bottom one flickers, and when we're outside and go in, then the top one flickers. So let's just see what happens if we plug that into a counter. So we've got our counter here. We'll give it a large number and put us around the middle somewhere, and then just plug in when we go the wrong way, we'll subtract. When we go the right way, we'll add, and we'll just watch what that number does. So when we go out, then it subtracts, and when we go in, it adds, like that. But the problem is, the car isn't going to just go into this zone and then stop. It's going to carry on and go out of that zone eventually. We can't have the whole track in the whole zone. Nothing will actually happen. So we want to know if we are near the finish line already, if we're actually like in this kind of zone, then pay attention to this stuff. Otherwise, just ignore it. So that if we are in this zone and then we enter the forwards trigger zone, then we want to add, and if we're in this zone and go out of the forwards trigger zone, we'll subtract. But if we are in the forward zone but over here and not close enough to it, we'll just ignore the fact that it goes in. So if we make another one, and move this along, then the moment we enter, so we have this trigger zone over here, the moment we enter that trigger zone, we're going to ignore it because we aren't closer to that central one. So we're not going to add anything to the counter. And if we exit and we're not within the central trigger zone, then we'll ignore that one as well. So to do that, this example, we'll just use nodes. So I'll add a new node and set it to no port, so that it doesn't have things going out and in from other places. It just exists in here, and this will let us block signals basically. So if you put that through there and then just let it go through out over there, so this will work exactly the same because it will just pass that signal through, and we'll do the same for this one. So at the moment this works the same, but we'll only let those pulses make it through if we are in this central area. So if we come into the forward, if I turn on the zones, so the one to the right is the forward one. So if we come into the forward one, it will pulse because we've gone into the zone, but we don't want anything to happen. So that's because we're not in the central one over here. So let's wire that into the power. So this means unless the car is in this area, the pulses won't make it through to the counter and nothing will happen. So a pulse is happening here, but it's not getting through to the counter. If we go into here, now stuff can happen. So if we go out of the forward zone, we're subtracting, and into the forward zone, we're subtracting. But if we're not in that central one, and then we go out, then it will just be completely ignored. So what you really want to do though is have like a variable so that you can have actual negative numbers here, so you don't have to worry about how big the counter is, because we don't want to display 180 and then 181 as you go on. So let's just have a variable, give it a name, and use a variable modifier that will target that name, which is G. So if I press down on the D-pad, you can use up and down on these to cycle through the relevant names. So we're going to add 1 to this variable when we get that on signal. So we'll just power that there, and then we'll have another one that adds -1, so it'll subtract 1 when you go the wrong way. And now I'll just that won't be able, I'll just pin that to the screen. So play time, so we go in here and nothing happens, but if we are now in this zone and then we go out of forward, that means we're going backwards. So it subtracts, and if we go in, then we're going forwards, so it adds. But if we go around the whole track and then go back in the right way, then it's going to add up on our laps. And if we go backwards, it's going to subtract. So this is another way of making sure people don't cheat, is by knowing how many laps they've actually done and kind of tracking that with this kind of tripwire system. Something to note though is if you like move really fast, then it doesn't always work correctly, because it's like it's hitting this one but not that one and things like that, so it gets a bit confused. So if you're finding that your car is moving too fast and it's kind of messing up, then just extend the different zones. So make sure the forward zone is a bit longer, for example. I'd like to thank MDKD99, WithSense, Rayco, and all of my other supporters for making this tutorial possible. Check out tapjars.com to find out how you can support me in helping Dreams creators. Thanks for your consideration, and I'll see you in the next one.